Hello, 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 and welcome everybody to another edition of the Blah Poetry Spot presents Words and Shit. So excited to be here with you guys. We are live on Facebook for the first time for this show. My name is Chibi. I'm going to be one of your hosts if you don't already know. My other illustrious co-host, Eddie Vega, San Antonio Taco Poet. How are you doing over there?
Hey, it's great, man. Great for a Thursday. I think it's Thursday, right? Because I can't.
We're here, so it has to be Thursday.
We're here. I think that's how I'm spacing out my days, is according to what event I got that evening. That tells me what day it's at.
This is I think my third Zoom call today. So it's been a busy Thursday.
It's been yes, exactly.
Celebrating birthdays via Zoom these days. That's what we do. So before we get into it, just a couple of things for our audience. We are live on Facebook. So we are monitoring the comments section. So please feel free to use the comments sections during our interview. You can shoot us questions that you'd like to ask our feature. You can comment on what you're hearing. Let's try and make this as interactive as possible. Outside of that, y'all just like sit back and enjoy yourself because today's show is going to be fantastic. We are ready to get going. Eddie, who do we got joining us today?
Hey, today we've got Lupe Mendez. He's a poet, educator, and activist, author of the poetry collection Why Am I Like Tequila on Willow Books. And most recently, he won the John A. Robertson Award from the Texas Institute of Letters for the best first book of poetry. He's got an MFA from UTEP, and his poetry's been like everywhere. Luna, Tinderbox, Rabbit Catastrophe. The list goes on and on, but my favorite one on here is Poetry Magazine. Poetry. They've rejected me like 4 times, so I'm thinking this is a really, really big deal to be in Poetry Magazine.
Where you at, Lupe?
Right here. What's up? Guys, thanks for having me on.
It's so good to see your beautiful face.
I know, right? It's good to see you guys. There's a pineapple in the background and a mirror. I'm in the bedroom. Best place for poetry reading.
Yeah. The bedroom is where the real poetry
all that.
Magical poetry.
All right. Well, speaking of poetry, we're going to cut out here. We're going to let you do your thing because that's what we want to do. We want to hear you and your work, new, old, recycled, whatever. This is your time. Take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, so to everybody out there, thanks for joining us. And here we go. First poem up, Manos, or Prayer Holding Night. A fist, no. Bullets out, the pop of skin, the twist of wrist where scars pox out, cool, rubbed together where the air runs to hide, fresh seconds of fresh wounds, el significado de un trancazo, gutting a confetti of fish scales, tocando dos monedas siempre, the rash that spiders out into bleed, reaching out into a pitch so black, gripping collected corn husks, looking for change in pockets, metal across jawbones, biting bricks against me, combs of warm water in hair, bandages holding paychecks, shovels up in the wet ground, translators with tongues slur, a shave with a sizzling knife, abriendo ataúd sin pésame, age measured in caguamas, red slices to a calf's throat, the nails that scratch white, dotted knuckles, magnetic cold bones on card tables, blisters wrapped in mint, a heart that waits to beat, a shake in the forearms, glass shards in tendons, boxing practice lessons, seconds jabbing reflex, boiled water thrown, thunder up on body, hacksaw for limbs, weighted fingers, axes split roots, the snap of ribs, a flung machete, palms cup clap, tenderness waiting, a prayer holding night. So a few of these are going to come from this book, Why I Am Like Tequila. And there's the cute sticker that they gave me for the award. So far so good. Thanks for everybody who was able to come through. And this is the title piece for the collection, Why I Am Like Tequila. The way this works is it's got a lot of end notes. So if you've never had the book, there are the end notes and footnotes. And so you'll hear me call out letters or numbers, and those will be the footnotes at the end, right? Why I Am Like Tequila. I have pencas, one, growing out of my body, beautiful blue maguey veins stretching, brown hands breathe in the sun. Let me bleed slowly. Every 7 years I am birthed, dissected, cannibalized. When I am useless, bury my husk in black wreaths too, que toquen conjunto, 3 next to white candles lit on nights when the moon won't shine. Drink for me, cry for me. Mi corazón es un mesontle, 4 layers in white flesh in the center, white blood cells, nectar seeping through the body. Greso, ready to fight, cut this out, fracaso y espinas, boil it out of its chambers, warm, viscous and clear across my chest. It beats in the heat of the day. Soy Jimador 5. Con su talache 6, who is alone in uneven cerros, who clears rocks that clutter growth, who won't leave until the job is done, who digs in the night, whose back is good enough to plow, who goes home and fucks, who is determined to plant a good seed, who eats with his hands, who sleeps in the callejones of magueyes, who dreams before his heart is plucked, who cuts at ladrones in the fields, who cleans casanga 7 after a dirty battle. 1, pencas, noun, the arms of a maguey, a leaf, a blade, an arm that stretches out, that reaches out, that flexes out, that fleshes forward, that first limb that touches the dew that extends into the palm of a Mexicano. 2, black wreaths, una chingadera. Mi papá won't let us put a wreath on the door, says it's blanquitos who want to remember death. That is why you have a wreath, a simple announcement someone has just died. The first time mi mamá and him drove around in 1974, he couldn't breathe, asked why so many people died in the month of December, shook his head, más triste, shook his head and said, me acuerdo del señor Dávila, died from a fever running around one summer durante el tiempo de las aguas, recogiendo sus caballos. 3, conjunto, the name of a genre of Mexican, Chicanx, Tex-Mex, Cuban music featuring instruments including fingers, bajo sextos, hearts, vocal cords, harps, adobe, violines, agonía, liquor, dirt floors, botines, acordeones, espíritu, gente huisteca, gente jarocho, pobreza, riqueza, a dance hall, 2 backup singers making $1 each in 1968, and a lookout to make sure that La Jura or the Texas Rangers don't show up to string someone on the branch of a roble, an oak tree, baboso, an oak tree. 4, mesontle, a heart, the gritty center in the center of a plant where tequila comes from. Your soul emanates from this grainy thing, fluid a bit, not blood, but molten rock rather. Your soul comes from water, comes from mercury, runs recio, runs hot, while you love until you are cold. When you touch, lock eyes, embrace from warmth, feel in this chest for this ember, this ember, this ember. 5, Jimador, noun, every Mexicanex who has ever lived, who has ever died, who has ever sweat, who sings corridos, a trio, a bolero, a cumbia, the image of a huichol, a rascuachero, a G.I. Joe, a mariachi, a viejo, una reina, una diosa, una tamalera, the man who makes this liquor you love to down in a single shot, you wasteful shit, by pulling up the root for your drink, by pulling up at your job, by working when you spend time reading this poem and resting. Right now, he is at work, call back later. 6, talache, really? A tool, a pickaxe, older than you, shares the age with dirt, with work, with iron, with rust, with wood, with houses, with bridges, with dig, with dug, with ditch, with edge, with groove. 7, casanga, nombre, uno, a sickle, a tool, sharp cuts into a half moon, leaves in a half moon. 2, the tool of revolution in September. 3, the primo hermano to the machete and the talache. 4, the shit ninjas would use if they were originally from Mexico or Central America. Cinco, the thing under my bed to ward off evil spirits. Seis, a weapon born at the same time of Huitzilopochtli, a slick of his copete. The moment he was born, he took it, spat on it, made it metal, made it hot. When he used it to cut at his sister, making her head the moon, and his brothers making them the stars, that boy is real good. Escuchaste? Al puro cien. So these next two pieces are not from the collection and actually pretty new. And since Eddie had already mentioned Poetry Magazine, both of these are found there. The first one is the first piece that'll probably come out in a new collection that I'm working on. Shh, don't tell nobody. Rules at the Juan Marcos Huelga School, even the unspoken ones. This should be posted in every classroom until the end of the school year. 1, no more than one child out of the classroom at one time. They might run away a monarch tugged in the direction of the wind. 2, the upstairs classes will not make excess noise because there are classes and the noise carries downstairs. 2, noise that needs to be made should flame out in a bonfire out of the roof where sunlight can hear it all. 3, any mothers coming into the classroom, send them to the principal's office unless they are teacher's helpers. They need to go to help the principal birth a school that can speak and spell words like revolución and work and hands and huelga. 4, no running in the hallways or stairs. Wait for nighttime. Children, you can run and race around in the dark in the cool of the trees, yelling. You cut a star on the tip of your tongue, then you realize ran around till morning and it is the dew on the tips of tree leaves you face. 5, no screaming or shouting in the classroom hallways or the stairwells. Shout on paper, write boldly in a book in the middle of an open field, in the street, in the classroom. Make sure your voice shrills. 6, no throwing of paper or trash on the floor. In my classroom, I will teach you to throw Molotov cocktails, bright orange ones that whistle in the air. And when they smash on those crazy school laws, they will burst in and open bright yellow, the scent of lemon, burst wood that will take over for a few days. 7, no one can go to Papa Burgers. In the future, the streets are still the same. And in December, on a Tuesday afternoon in 2016, one of your descendants will be stabbed merely for standing in the day. The North Side knows scars, knows body when it needs to mourn. 8, if you take your class to the park, be sure that everyone crosses the street going and coming. Move in packs. March the streets together. Keep the body flickering. Make the voice resist quiet. This going, this coming is resistance. 9, all shirts will be buttoned. This is how we mean business. You come to school bien fino, and we will teach you the 4 winds, the reason we are always armed to the touch of a blade. We are always blades, bien filosos. Yes, be sure that your classroom is reasonably clean before you let the class out at the end of the day. One day, all of these classrooms will no longer hold any of us. Leave no evidence why we were here. We exist in the whisper, the tender cinnamon string and muscle. Marcha, yeah. And I think that's my 15. And then I'll save the last one for the end. Or do I got more time, guys?
Keep going. Yeah, one more.
Sweet. All right, cool. So then I'm gonna do one for, because even though we're dealing with like quarantine stuff, for folks back home in Houston here, this still has some echoes in current day. Mercy, which is a poem about Harvey. Immigration officers call off a massive hunt. State, there are too many hurricanes in the area they want to pick apart. We go right back to work in Houston, ask families what they need after Harvey. One lady sits on a chair outside her place, dips a piece of mold in her black coffee. She hands us bricks, wet ones, says to take them to help build that new wall. Said they won't even stop all the raindrops from crossing over in the night. A little girl traces a water line and crayon in one room, hasta aquí llegó, on tippy toes. Another man hands us his dripping eviction notice. His face is soggy with fright. He tells us the cops will be here soon to kick people out into the waterlogged streets. He asks us to find the word mercy in the dictionary and rip the damn thing out. I love that. Love the applause. That's awesome.
Applause, 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 applause. Lupe Mendez, everybody, fantastic. And I got to tell you, Lupe, I'm monitoring the comments here on Facebook, and you're getting a lot of love.
Yay!
People just screaming your name, basically. There's a lot of Lupe, Lupe.
Dude, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
So I wanted to open by asking you, why are you like tequila? But you answered that question for us.
So like, I kept on thinking of so I've been a teacher for, I have gray hair now, so things, right? But I learned as a 5th grade science teacher that like the human body sheds every single one of its cells in approximately 7 years. So like it remakes itself, right? Like every single cell is replaced. And so I thought of the concept of that, and then it always stuck out. My family is from Jalisco, and so making tequila is like, half my family works in the tequileria, so right, they're full time. So like conceptually, it's all that, and then the fact that it takes 7 years for a maguey to grow full size, to take the root and then make that into a pulque and then mezcal and then tequila, right? So then I thought of the idea of what are the pressures that the body goes through, right? Like either self-imposed or things in life, or when you are tested and boiled and placed in fire. And then there's a moment when you're on that downhill side, like everything that awful's happening, at some point you got to come up. And for me, I feel like that's when you're bien fino, like the most refined version of you possible exists after a certain period. And so I'm like, then every person I know is a certain form of some kind of a liquor, because you strong, you refined, like you doing it all. So but it's like that concept. And so like I thought, well, what the hell, that's a title for a book.
Damn, we got real deep just like 2 minutes into the conversation.
So it's that stuff, right?
Lupe Mendez, everybody. Lupe Mendez.
Yeah, you said that part of your discussion here. You said at some point you're bien fino, and you said bien fino before you said fine. Right. There's a lot of that in your poetry. You're using a lot of Spanish words, and not just Spanish words, but I noticed like colloquial South Texas or Texas kind of words too. What is that role? What is the role of that kind of language in your poetry?
I think it's the only way I know how to process, of course. Like as being a kid growing up in Texas, in the US Southwest, but then also a Gulf Coast kid, right? Like you're an amalgam of all sorts of different things, right? So conceptually, like the number of Mexicanos that live in Texas that are not from northern Mexico, that are from the western side, so Jalisco and the mountainous regions, the level of language is slightly different, but then it's also all the things that you're learning here, as well as all the things that are English that are different from both the West Coast and the East Coast. And so it's all this amalgamation, right? Like my mother grew up in South Texas. So she's from San Benito and my dad's from just outside Guadalajara. So the house was always filled with such a beautiful array of language that's I'm able to like code switch in so many different ways that I think writing became a part of that too. Like where did all these levels of language exist, and are there things that now that I'm older, I'm like, people don't say, nobody else around me says that, but I know at some point somebody at somebody's house knows exactly what I'm talking about. So let's go. Okay.
I totally
like when you said that word kawama. When you said kawama, I'm like, oh, that brings it back.
Yeah, that's it though.
Yeah.
Like where the different, like you say kawama in certain spots, and like I don't know that everybody in Texas knows what one is, but you go South Texas, You go Cali, you go Chicago, like Mexicanos from certain regions, that's the deal. And like that's how language moves, right?
Mhm.
So yeah.
This idea of like code switching, like it's where is it in your writing that you find the comfort to switch from one to the other? Like, do you intentionally decide like where you're going to insert your Spanish, or is it just like something that organically happens?
When I'm first writing a piece, sometimes it's I can't think of any other words that describe it best, so I'll flip into one or the other. And then in the rewrites or the edits, as I'm going through and I'm thinking, like, there's parts of my brain that as I'm writing, I'm like translating the work into one or the other language. Y se me sale, like it just becomes a part of what that is. And so I'm just like, oh, that sounds better this way. And I'll play with the way that looks. Other times I find like that if I write completely in Spanish, I have less editing to do. And I don't know what that, I don't get it. Like I would think I would, because like I think I might have a senior high school kid level of language in Spanish.
Yeah.
But because it's not exactly academic, but it's built academically because of job, like out of necessity. But I don't feel as, so I would think like my brain's like, you're probably going to need more editing if you're writing completely in Spanish. Whereas in English, I will spend twice as long on a poem that I do in Spanish, and it's weird. But
I was going to ask you because like our audience would like to know, like, you grew up in the States, yes?
yeah, I will. So the technical side, right? So my early years up until about freshman year of high school, we traveled. So stateside, I would be here from October until March. And then I would spend April until September in Mexico. And so my teachers would give me assignments and they're like, finish this. And when you come back, you'll go to the next grade. We'll give you a test and move it on. It was part of like the being able to get away with it because my folks put me in a private school, because every public school wanted to put me in special ed because they didn't have ESL programming. And so the way my parents got through it was to put me through private school, but that allowed us to move and travel and then go home and farm and then come back. And so by the time I got into like middle school, like right about 7th, 8th grade, I was like, can we stop? I'd like to be in one spot. And then, yeah, so that's the way it worked.
Yeah. The beauty, you truly did have like both cultures like immersed, it wasn't like a vacation to Mexico.
It was like oh, you got to go visit family. I was like, I was milking cows at 5 a.m. What are you talking about? I was getting eggs. Shut your mouth.
But come on, like at this point in life, like you wouldn't have had it any other way, right?
Oh yeah, no, it's funny too, because like I think about like the images of what we understand is poverty or second class citizenship or any of that stuff, right? And I was fortunate enough, I consider myself fortunate enough that even though stateside we would be considered poor, I still had the luxury and the privilege of being able to travel to the mountains in Mexico and then growing up on a beach in Galveston. Like I'm 8 blocks. I can get on my bike and 2 minutes later I'm on the beach, or I like walk outside my family's house in Mexico and I'm staring at a cerro, like beautiful blue, like environment, like richest life I could ever have lived. So like,
now, what did that do for like identity between being Mexican and Mexican American?
that still there. The number of times I get like folks trying to call me on the table, they're like, you're not really Mexican or you're not American. I'm like, hey, I've got letters to prove you absolutely whatever. Let's have conversations. I always constantly feel on the outside, if that makes any sense. Like,
yeah.
I think there's different ways that I think that's part of the draw to writing and to poetry. Like all of us have this need to want to belong, and we don't in certain ways, and so we put that out there to almost like a, a call out as to this is who I am and this is where I fit. But yeah, there's still moments. I'm 43 and I'm like, I don't quite fit in with all the stuff that's happening.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I got to live a little bit in Veracruz, and when I was there, people called me gringo and pocho.
yeah, right. And so like, it's funny. I'll go home and they're like, "Hey, your accent's off," and I'm like, "It's because I married a Dominican." They're like, "Oh, ese lo que te pasó? Ay, pobrecito."
Yeah.
Pobrecito.
It happens
Whatever.
every time. Like anytime I have a conversation with my family in Mexico, they're like, "You have such a strange accent." I think essentially I just I'm a Southerner, you know, like
Right.
I'm a South Texaner, you
Right.
know?
And even that, it also perplexes me too. Like I can go to South Texas to visit family, and the amount of shit I get for being even this complected. Like my family's like, "Oh, maybe you should stay in more. You shouldn't get so dark." And I'm like, "What? Like where do you think we are? Like what? Stop talking." You don't make no
Like maybe you should stay in more.
that. It's
I
that.
see it.
Oh my God, that's that. It's that accent, right? It's like, but then it's also like I've literally tried to write a poem about the old. This is so bad. The viejitas who do the rosary at velorios in the valley. The accent in English, because they're not doing the rosary in English, in Spanish. They're doing it in English, right? So it's this like wicked South Texas, like our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Like it's just like, and you only like you go and you hear it and you're like, oh my God, I'm in the valley. Like what the hell? Like, and it resonates, but like unless you've been grown, if you've seen and grew up in South Texas, like you won't know that accent from anything. So,
Yeah,
like,
yeah. San Antonio, Houston, Austin. I can always tell when I run into someone from the Valley where I'm like, you have a 956 number, don't you?
I think it's a rhythm, though. It's a rhythm. It's
rhythm.
not necessarily like the accent. I mean, part of this is accent. Part of it's a rhythm that you kind of develop or lose. You know, I've been out of the Valley for 20 years, and I might have lost some of it somewhere. But when I go back, no,
se te pega like real fast.
All the se te pega, all the long vowels.
Oh man.
So let me ask you, Lupe, because you've lived all over, right? You went to school in El Paso. You know, like lived in the Valley, like, and now you're in Houston. You know, and so there are places like El Paso, like the Valley, that are very Mexican. They're very Latino-esque. And then Houston, which is truly like just like a melting pot of everything. How do you find the Latinx community is different in a very Latin-centric city versus a city like Houston that is, you know, like a mix of all?
You know what's funny is, so when I got my degree out of UTEP, I did the whole program online. So the few moments that I physically got to go onto campus were breathtaking, because I could go on campus and literally it'd be the only time ever in my academic life where I was hearing full-on conversations in Spanish on a college campus, and that didn't happen for my undergrad. But interestingly though, going to undergrad here in Houston, having grown up on the island, having traveled between the Valley and Galveston and Mexico, when I got to Houston, I think it was like my second week on campus at the University of St. Thomas, and there were 4 of the most beautiful Gucci-fied girls I'd ever seen in my life. Las Fresas, yo. But like when I heard them, they were all Latina, all like dark-haired, sunglasses, big huge aretes, all in black, tacones, but like pulseras por donde quiera. But their Spanish, I had never heard it in my life. And my first thought was like, damn, y'all fine. And then my second thought was, what is that Spanish? And I literally raced to my dorm room and called my mother and was like, Mom, there are brown people with money? And she was like, pobrecito mijo, you've never understood. And it was like, it was a humbling moment. I had never once associated brownness with like anything richness. Other than with richness. And so that threw me for a loop when I got to Houston, like the number and different ways that Latinidad exists, that Latin America isn't just the images that I knew growing up as stuff that was based in campesino life, like metropolitan, like the world, the Americas' oldest cities are older than the US. Like the literature just alone, and as an example in Mexico, like the first American female writer is Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Like culturally, those are necessities to study and understand. And so as I got older and became more aware of what was out there, it felt comfortable to have conversations with Latinos who weren't just Mexicano or anywhere else. I ended up marrying a Dominican, so obviously things are great.
Right. You're like, there's like a pan Latinidad there.
It's that stuff.
Speaking of Latinidad, you know, like you I heard in your poems, you dropped a lot of the X in there.
Yeah.
And what's that been like? Because it's, you know, I'm 43 also, so it's relatively a new thing to do and to say.
Yeah. I keep going into, I shouldn't do this, but I keep stepping into Facebook, and when people are like, I'm not Latinx, I'm Hispanic, and I'm like, okay, that's great. None of these words were created by us, so what does it really matter? It's whatever it is for whatever, you know, someone wants to label you one way, deal with it and move on. I appreciate the way that language can change, and it needs to change and can change. And if it's because of political need and addressing the necessities of a space, then what the hell, why not? Before the word Hispanic was used, it was Latin. So adding an X at the, like, one extra letter doesn't like mess up who you are and how you exist in the world. Is it still going to be used to pigeonhole you in a negative way? Possibly. Can you then control the language and shift it to say something else? Okay, great. We, by the same token, like words like being rascuache or tapatio, or, you know, whatever those things are, Quisqueyano, like any of that stuff, those are also changes in language. Like they are derived from things, and times change. And if everything were to stay static, we would still be speaking in Old English. So whatever.
Yeah, you see a lot of it too in the queer community. That's the word I like to use. But you know, where it was like LGBT, and then it was LGBTQ, and then LGBTQIA, and it's like all these different the nomenclature of how people want to identify. And I think it's just a thing of ownership. You know, like finding the way that you identify and grabbing onto that and accepting that people identify differently. You know, I like to use the term queer. Other people are offended by it, but it's the identity that I have, you know, found a home in.
Right. And that's what it speaks to. It's how can you reach out as much to find inclusivity in the way language works? Because Spanish, unlike English, is hella masculine, and like, why not?
Language, yeah.
What? No.
Like, what's the really? Because like, what, like, how would, so if it's a group, if there's like 2 girls in a group and there's 5 guys in the group, then everybody's muchachos. Hell no, that's not the way. Grammatically, that's wrong still. So what, like all of that stuff, right? So
I mean, we just had Dia de los Niños you know?
Right. It
And
should
then
like be
include boys and girls.
holding like it should just go with a different word, like niñex. Let's
Niñex.
do that.
Next,
Let's do that.
next.
Yeah, I remember hearing a podcast where they were talking about like a non-gender specific way of saying niece and nephew, and they came up with like niefling or something like that. It's like trying to invent ways to include everybody, you know.
Right,
So
right.
it's a process. We have a fantastic question from the audience. I'm over here watching the Facebook comment. Patricia Smith has a question, and if this is the Patricia Smith, I'm fangirling.
It is.
It is.
Oh my gosh, Patricia Smith is on.
Hi, Patricia.
She's watching our show? What?
She's watching our show. I love you. So she has a question regarding code switching, and I'm just going to read it because it's beautifully written because it's Patricia Smith. It's code switching. It's a familiar concept to me as an African-American poet who uses cultural references and vernacular not readily familiar to anyone outside the community. I'm drawn to your work because I feel so many parallels, but the Spanish is often a line that's difficult for me to cross. I hesitate to stop reading in order to look up the translation. Often the passages are lengthy, and I can infer most of the narrative from what surrounds it, but how much is that other reader in your mind as you write, if at all? Do you worry that some readers will walk away with only part of the experience you intended?
Love the question. Thank you, Patricia. You're amazing. To answer the question, I find that language, because it's a part of cultural understanding, shifts very much in the same way, the parallels that Patricia was speaking to. There are moments where I wonder, will the person who's reading this only get a part of this? And then I have to think humbly, am I getting someone like my old man to read a poem? Which at the end of the day, I want to be able to have the most machista guy, bien culero el cabrón, to like read one of my poems, right? And if I can figure out a way to address the language enough that, because there are already obstacles with the level of English that I use, am I not addressing those readers potentially who were Spanish speaking? And so I am okay with if someone only gets a part of it, because there is going to be another part of my audience that won't get all the English. And so the emotive nature of the work, the context, the image, and the whole picture hopefully comes across the best way it can, and to help move the needle on bilingualism. I'm a massive advocate for it, and so I would like my audience to consider that for themselves. Like, if you only came away with a piece of this, think of everyone who doesn't speak English. They got something different from that experience. And yeah, I hope that answered the question. But yeah, like I think of those terms. I think of my old man. I've never been able to read my dad a poem. He wouldn't understand either all of the Spanish or all of the English. He's only got a second grade level of language. Like, I retaught my dad reading and writing just enough for him to pass the citizenship exam. And so, like, I was in middle school when that process was happening, and that was humbling. And so, language wise, yeah, I keep that in the back of my mind. Like, am I being arrogant in creating the language the way I do and adding in the Spanish? I don't intend it that way. But if a part of you comes away from the work and think, man, what was that other piece of it? I'm okay with people looking things up. I'm okay if you stop in the middle of a poem and then go look it up and then come back to it. That's great. Or if you save it, or if you never do, I want it there so that it's jarring enough to remind people of what are all the capacities that language can exist in.
Mhm.
Do you think there's like a parallel with your students who are probably reading something in English and see something that's also in English, but not something they understand because, the test or the text was written somewhere else with a more elevated maybe English that they're not getting it too?
You know, I so I've been a teacher for quite some time, and I started to wrestle with what we consider academic English, and then pushing back and then providing my kids the understanding that their level of English is important, that what the language that they know from their houses to the street to the school are important spaces to be in. Um, every year that I taught English for the last 5 years, previous to this year, I'm a teacher trainer. I would start off the year by showing the kids Jamila Scott's poem that she did as a TEDx, where she literally talks about using Caribbean English to talk at home, using street vernacular for working with friends, and then her academic language because, oh yeah, she's got a doctorate. Like, and that level of that's the code switching. Like, we can say it might be all levels of English, but it's not, because those are all different languages in and of themselves. Like, it's got its own syntax, it's got its own lexicon. So, but all of those are valid ways to comprehend and process the world. So why not use that? So I started doing that with my coursework. I pulled in as many writers of color that I could, and then created an entire course around authors of color to do away with the myth that the canon had all the access points. I used Patricia's work. I used Carmen Tafoya. Chibi, I've used your work to be able to express to the kids, like, this is how language exists, and if you caught it real fast, that made you the expert. And if you had to look up the other parts, that means that you're learning. And what better way to be a better reader and a writer than to question and explore and research what this stuff really is.
Let's
But
dive into the work that you do just a little bit more for those who may be unfamiliar, because you are an educator. You are an institution in Houston, just in case you're unaware. You are an institution, and you started Tintero Projects.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about like what that is and what that experience has brought to you and the community of writers in Houston?
So Tintero Projects is I think we're now like 4 years old. Yeah. I originally started it to be able to provide a platform for Latinx and other writers of color across the Gulf Coast. The idea being, well, it was twofold. I was tired of only having to hear about the West Coast and the East Coast. Done. I wanted to be able to put a foothold and be able to say, hey, there's a whole series of writers out of Houston and the rest of the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, all the way back down to Florida included. Stop ignoring what's right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I correlated that with the idea that that was what was happening, especially with writers of color. And I've worked at the same number of years that I was an educator. I worked with Nuestra Palabra Latino writers having their say here in town to promote Latino writers for over 20 years. And the one thing I kept learning was that if you find a space and if you can get people access to books, people will show up to readings and people will buy the stuff. If you can do that and give people a stage to do their stuff, magic every time. And so I went back to that as a ground root and thought, as I kept curating other shows and doing all sorts of work, and started noticing that I was running into fewer and fewer Latino writers in the Houston area. And so then I decided, well, let's go back to basics and let's try to see and provide a platform space so that anybody can do the work that they want to do. So now Jasmine and I, with Tinderbox Projects, we do workshops, we provide readings, book launches, and submission parties where we don't actually do the heavy lift. We just say, hey, here's a venue, we can pay you, you have stuff, let's get it together and let's put it out there. And so the workshops that we run, they're free. I run like the first half hour and it's like, hey, everybody, tell me who you are, what you ate for lunch, and your favorite day of the week. And then I turn over the rest of it to the guest host who runs the workshop with what they know to do and what works. Mm-hmm. And that's it. Like if all we can do is become that advocacy piece to let people continue that, then why the hell not? Mm-hmm. My biggest piece is the work that we're going to do is going to be for free, because yeah, we'll take donations and that's great, but I'm not into any kind of gatekeeping prospects. Like if you don't have the money to come in the door, I don't care. You deserve a space at the table. Let's go. Mm-hmm. And so that for me has always been a big policy, and that's the way it's kind of flourished, and it's been a good run so far. Nobody's told us to get the hell out, so we're still around.
Yeah, you're getting a lot of affirmation in the Facebook comments about your submission parties and the work you do. So salute to you, sir.
Yay.
Way to go. Hey, so you talked a lot about being a teacher for a lot of years, and now you're a teacher trainer. So you're teaching teachers, right? But what has teaching and interacting with students at different ages done for your work?
Shit. There's a moment at which, man, and I can't think of, there's a poet out there in the Twitter, and I literally will be Googling this in like 2 minutes once this is over, who made the comment that poets are not observing an event, that poetry is the event, right? And I'm so with that concept, but I also think that writers humbly have to take that moment, experience whatever that is, and then take a sliver of that and try to piece some kind of understanding to acknowledge that a person was there. My first 2 years of teaching, first year teaching, I lost a student. Right at about December, student passed away because during spring break, their father, just in a drunken rage, drowned my 4th grade student. And I had a hell of a time with this kid trying to get him to read. And it turns out that I hadn't realized it, but this kid went through my classroom library and stole like 6 books, 2 of which he would read to his youngest brother. And I carried that knowledge and had to translate for the mom so that she could go identify the body for the police. And so it moves you when you see the things that are happening to your students and their families. And sometimes because of the way that it affects you, because of where you are in that network, it becomes a moment of record. It becomes a moment of conversation. It becomes an ode. It becomes the elegy to speak about the students and their experiences. In this current collection, I have one poem about the reaction of a priest to one of my students just as Trump had gotten elected. And the kids wanted to hold a forum to discuss what were all the possibilities and what did we know and what did we not know about what was going to happen with his presidency, like what would happen, especially with undocumented citizens and their families, which was a real fear. And one of my students went to ask if they could have a forum on campus, and the priest basically told them no, because the fear was that all the kids and their parents would get stirred and riled up like wild, crazy Latinos, savage Latinos, and possibly burn piñatas in our patio. And this kid came to my classroom in tears. And what am I supposed to do? Like, I can confront the priest, which did happen, and I got written up, but whatever. But I'm not going to not write a poem about your shitty ass response to my kids. So yes, I wrote a poem and dedicated it to you and put it in my book, because I'm gonna get the last word. Shut your mouth. Here we go. Addictive.
Don't
Yeah,
piss
but was it?
Don't piss
You
off.
did write it
We'll
after,
write a poem about you.
but you did write it after you were no longer working there, all right?
No, I wrote it like this book was getting put together while I was still working with that priest in the building.
Oh,
Are
no,
you
but I
kidding
mean,
me?
did you publish it after?
Lupe's bien chingón, okay?
It was, well, so like that young lady too, like I wrote the piece, I sent her a copy of the book and I dedicated it to her. And later she wrote me and said that it was one of the first times in her life that anybody had done anything that felt like advocating for her, and that it was in the form of a poem was really awesome. And I hadn't thought of that. I was like, I'm pissed off. I rang this poem. You suck. But for this other,
That's awesome. No, that is awesome.
For this kid, it's like a whole totally different thing. And I'm like, holy shit, I hadn't thought of that. And so it's a byproduct, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
Students need more advocates.
Let's dive into that a little bit, because one of the things that you wanted to talk about is like morning writing, and obviously like we all experience grief, we all go through troubled times. Poetry isn't always optimistic. Sometimes it's a process, it's a therapeutic, and we have to sit in the grief in the morning. Tell us a little bit about your experience with that kind of writing.
Man, so now in my early 40s, a lot of the work that I was working with has been very F you about all of it, right? Like, you're not going to get the best of me. Here you go, bien chingón, Molotov cocktails, bite me, que sé yo, right? But most recently, the last few months, dealing with the loss of several things, like just a little bit before the pandemic stuff started happening. I had already written a poem in the collection about my tia Maria's house in San Benito, Texas, and so I don't have my grandparents on my mother's side. My maternal grandparents passed away long before I was ever born. My mother lost her mother at a very young age during childbirth. My mother was the middle of 9 kids, and my grandmother passed away with the 9th kid. And she lost my grandfather to tuberculosis. And so the only last piece of evidence of what family was in the valley was this house, 106 Dig Dowling, right? And most recently, when I wrote the piece as this beautiful, like almost half romantic, whimsical poem about where my mother is from, turned into something different because in this last year, a cousin of mine was murdered in the house. There's still an investigation pending, like there's stuff still up, but the somebody set fire to the house with my cousin's body still in it. And the house is now condemned. And so nobody can see the space. And so I thought I could write more about this house, but in rereading that original poem, I didn't need to. Like, I didn't realize that sometimes as we're writing, what we think is one thing becomes something completely different. Like the vestige of that emotional investment that you make to a writing can change the tone of it without you even thinking of it, right? So I feel like sometimes that the writing that we produce that we feel is one way pays respects to things in other ways, right? The writing that we create that we feel is in mourning, cuando uno anda de luto, it can change. The language later can be something else. We might not be entirely even aware of it at that moment, but subconsciously, maybe we are. Subconsciously, the body may be feeling it differently and producing the language in a different way. And so I've been thinking about that a lot, especially now during the pandemic. It almost feels counterintuitive, but I'm literally writing poems that don't seem so sad, but there is a solemnness to the way that they're coming about. And so I wonder what that'll look like the further we step away from what this is. So
Yeah.
You know, there's that process when you're in mourning, or in our culture, like when you're doing the rosary, and between each decade, there's a song.
oh yeah,
Right.
yeah.
You know, I've been next to my sister at one of my cousin's rosaries, and she's like, "Is it almost over?" And I'll say, "No, we haven't sang Un Día de la Vez yet, or we haven't sang Amor Eterno yet." You know, like, but like, what is it about that ritualization, you think, in the morning? You know, that like those, what are some of those elements, I guess, that you have?
I think it's about trying to find some kind of organized way to process what is happening in a moment, right? Like everyone goes to a velorio, everyone mourns some kind of a loss. It's the in between. I think like the best parts of best parts, if that's, can you even say that, best part of a velorio is the message at the end when family members get up to speak, and then who you end up connecting with in that ceremony, in that space during the morning, right? Like you might end up in full conversations with family members and be seated with them for over an hour for a rosary reading that you hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and now you've reconnected. Sadly, you've reconnected in because of a certain thing. My tia Maria used to say, when you go to a velorio, pay attention to who showed up, not what they wore. Pay attention to what they said, because she would say, even when I die, I'll be the very thing on their lips. And I thought about that as a catalyst. Like someone's death causes a certain series of events to move forward. What do we make of those things after they've gone? Like, how do we continue not just their understanding of the world, but like what in the immediacy of a passing, what are those things that occur, and how can you hang on to that?
And they, you know, and they must call you el poeta or the poet. They must know by now
Ooh.
that you're out there and published.
Family?
Oh,
No. Yeah, the funny part is, unlike my wife, my family, like my parents have never been to one of my readings ever. Which, like when the book came out, my dad was like, well, "How much did you pay? How much did you pay to get this?" And I was like, "Dad, I didn't pay." Like they made the book. They're like, "That's the cover." Yes, that's the cover. Well, I don't like it. Well, okay, but how much are people paying for the book? How much are you selling the book for? It's like $17.99. Oh, well, why didn't you do it for 20? But like it's so it's like
¿verdad?
that, right? It's so like they're like, "Are you gonna quit your job?" No, I'm not gonna quit. Like what? I don't. Okay, well, thanks. Did they pay you? Did you sign?
I was wondering, yeah, and I was wondering, like, if you're, you know, those that know, maybe your younger cousins who are on the social media or whatnot.
Tampoco.
Has your
No,
role
see,
changed?
Well, so my family in Mexico, whenever they see me, my funny part, my what do you call it? My photo for my bios and stuff, it's always a shot that was taken when I was hosting a reading and I was on the mic. And so my cousins in Mexico think that like I'm religious and I'm doing sermon stuff. So what? I don't, so ni modo. But so like, yeah, like I have a few cousins that are like, hey, your work is really great. A lot of my family doesn't even know that. They're like, oh, he's a teacher. He's
Yeah.
writing about teaching.
So you are obviously a prolific writer. You've been published in a lot of places. I have two questions. One is coming from the audience. A lot of people are asking basically the same, different versions of the same question. Patricia Smith, I love you, Patricia. Patricia Smith, says, I understand that you're raising a small, rambunctious human being. Since you and your wife are both writers, how do you practically find dedicated time for your work and creatively teach her that language and the writing of it is the most phenomenal thing there is? How often, somebody else asked, how often do you write? Basically, what is your work-life balance? How do you manage writing and working and art and raising a family?
And the Luz Maria show.
And filming the Luz Maria show.
Yes. She has more fans than you, by the way, just so you know.
I know. That's a given. So it's, well, funny, but not funny. So prior to being in a relationship, writing occurred from like 8 o'clock at night until like 2 o'clock in the morning. Soltero life, doing the shit. On the nights that I wasn't out clubbing or whatever. But when Jasmine and I got together, we have very different like body rhythms. So Jasmine's very much a morning person, and I am not. I am very much a like night owl. And so prior to Luce being born, we kind of staked our claims in she'd write in the morning and I'd write at night, and things are great. Because of the fact that Jasmine also deals with lupus, it also shifted how we engaged in the work, how we shared our work. We learned when to put the writing away out of necessity for like the things that were urgent. Like health is a thing. So in the years where her lupus was treating her rather roughly, I wasn't getting a lot of writing done, and I was okay with that. Like I wasn't pushing. I'm very much not a believer in the you have to write every day, because that is not being realistic. And those of us that are not afforded the opportunity to go to a cabin and write every day because I have to change diapers and put on Moana for the 250th time, like things, right? So yeah, I now I get writing in where I can get it in. Jasmine's the same way. Like our schedules are super crazy now, and so we can still eke by a fragment of what we were being able to write, but we try to make sure that we provide that space and time for each other. So Jasmine will get up in the morning and do some writing when everybody's dead asleep. And then at night when everybody's dead asleep and Luz hasn't popped up at 2 o'clock in the morning because she wants somebody to go walk her back to the bed, we'll write that way. In the middle of the day, I'll take Luz to go a walk around the neighborhood while she tries to read or write something. The same thing with me. She'll take her to go take care of some stuff, and we work in tandem that way sometimes.
Sounds like a beautiful partnership.
Right. We try.
It's a dance.
Yes. Every day. Every day is a dance.
Hey, I've got one more question. I don't know about Chibi, but I got one more question.
Yeah.
And it's about origins. I just want to know about the magic of San Benito, Texas, home of Freddie Fender, Octavio Quintanilla,
yeah,
and your mom, and your family.
Yeah.
Like what is the magic there in that little, because it's a little town.
It's tiny. I think for me, it has always spoken to a history that I identify with in a very, not weird, but a very different way. Like every time you see images of the 30s and the 40s and the 50s in the US, it's American Graffiti or Pearl Harbor, the movie, or different Greece, right? Like different aspects of that. But going through my mom's yearbook from 1955 and seeing that everybody in the damn yearbook was brown, and that, like, in my mom's generation when she was in high school, they taught shorthand, and so all the damn notes in the yearbook are written in shorthand. And I asked her, why the hell did y'all write it in shorthand? She's like, well, we didn't want any of the adults reading our stuff. And I was like, mira que, what? Like that? I didn't. And then like that whole, and I'm like, that's not any of the images that I see and what I understand was this time period. And then having conversations with older elders, speaking about what life was like in the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, rationing things. Like you had ration stamps and kids drank like tablespoons of mercury to like cure a cough. Yeah, right? Like crazy shit that I'm like, when the hell was this? Like, what do you, huh? But so like those are those understandings that I find that, and the appeal for me is that spaces like South Texas are part of the counter narrative, because you don't get to hear about all the things that these spaces were unless you go and ask the questions. Scholars in ethnic studies have asked the questions and are now producing the books about them. Mm-hmm. But unless you can find those, you're not going to hear about it. And I am definitely engrossed in the concept of counter narratives, because that's a counter history that needs to be out in the world. And it's part of my family's lineage. And so I love that space.
Udo awesome. 956.
That all night, yo.
So final question, because you are a prolific and published writer and poet and an educator, and I feel like we would be amiss if we did not ask you to bestow your wisdom upon us. So what advice would you have for someone, up and coming writers who are trying to get published? They're trying to put their work out there, because you have put your work out there and are a voice for the Latinx writers and community. So what advice would you give to someone?
This is why side note, I think I love Patricia Smith, and the conversations I've been able to have with Patricia acknowledge for me, like, I was doing it right. Like, understanding that, like, my biggest piece of advice to anybody that's out in the world is do what Patricia has done and do what I'm telling you to do. Go to open mics, go to spaces in public, like, cut your teeth on some raw, awful work and build, because you won't know unless you're out there trying and talking and immersing yourself in these spaces. I began all of this through humbly attending poetry spots here in Houston, and I didn't know I didn't know anything about an MFA, or that you could get the fact that Poetry Magazine paid me to do a poem. Hey! You told me that shit when I'm 43. You'd have told me that when I was 23, I'd have been like, what? Like that, I didn't know this. Like, you learn through word of mouth. It's like schooling, but from a very base level. And don't believe your own hype. Like, if you're only surrounding yourself with just one open mic space, go around and see the other ones, because it's like you're only playing in your neighborhood. Dabble and go find all the spaces. go out of town and go visit somebody else's space. Learn who they're reading. What are they writing about? Read all those things. Like catch and catch and catch and learn as much as possible, because what else are you gonna do? Like not write, not read, but
Go get heckled.
Go get heckled. It's okay to that. Like that builds that. And I would also say try theater. Like go audition. Like there is, and I will still say this till I'm blue in the face. Everybody on Twitter and Facebook that ever writes about how sad they are that they got a rejection from a publication, I love y'all and I will hug you and I feel for you, but that ain't shit. The immediacy of an audition, they look you square in the face and tell you, you're not our type. You're too skinny, you're too fat, you're too short, you're too tall, you're too old, you're too young, bye. And you're gone. Like that'll firm you up real fast when it comes to rejection. If I had to tell you the number of times I got rejected in auditions, that's like 10 times. No, I'm fine. A rejection by letter? Okay, that's great. You sent me an email and you said thank you. No, you said thank you.
Put it so kindly too. They're like,
it's so nice.
Work. It just didn't find a home in our publication this time.
Didn't find a home. Oh, I hate that.
Again, try it. I've literally had a director tell me to my face, I don't want to ever see you on stage here ever again.
Oh,
real talk.
Wow. Yeah.
And that's real. And then they're like, okay, next. What are you still doing here? Next.
Yeah.
Next. You're still standing there. Go.
On a side note, if you haven't watched it yet, Hollywood on Netflix.
I have it queued. I need to watch it.
Oh, it's all that. It's all that you just talked about. Oh,
done.
I'm like watching it. I'm like, oh, this is so painful, but so real.
I think like part of me too is like, I am fascinated, but then also like, with slam, like the immediacy of how that poetry works. But then I'm also like, it's crowd stuff as well, and it's like there's all sorts of levels to it, and a part of me is like, I could maybe nope, because I gotta memorize a poem. Nope, if they're not lines in the script and there's no egg, nope, I'm gonna mess that up. Not gonna nope.
Talk about cutting your teeth, you know. That'll do it. And some venues are friendlier than others. Some are puro slam, you know. and you know, we all grow through the communities that we immerse ourselves.
But that would be my biggest suggestion is find those spaces and begin there, because that's going to be your most earnest opportunity to try all the things you want to try.
Yeah, I think
awesome.
There's nothing wiser there than just, you know, like get out into the community. You know, like writing is such a lonely activity, but it doesn't have to be a experience. You know, you can get out there and immerse yourself with so many writers. So thank you, Lupe, for those that amazing piece of advice, and for this entire conversation that has been.
This was awesome, guys. Thank you.
Tequila worthy, absolutely. Will you do us the honor of reading one more poem before we close out, please?
Yes. Thank you, everybody who tuned in. I don't even know how many people, but that's awesome. I hope everybody's doing well. Stay safe. Wash your hands. Don't touch your face. I just touched mine. I ruined that, whatever. So one last piece. This one's from the May edition of Poetry Magazine, dedicated to Jose and Rose Escobar. Jose was wrongly deported to El Salvador and was reunited this past year with his family. And so this is a piece I wrote for them. How Candles Are Made. Epigraph. It was hard for me, but I still kept hope because I knew that my wife was by herself. Jose Escobar, quoted in Houston Area Man Returns Home After Sudden Deportation in 2017. Houston Public Media, July 2019. The candle is made of paraffin wax, made of petrol, crude oil debajo de la tierra, donde viven los difuntos. When I say difuntos, I mean we come from seeds. A candle is a spine that holds all our bodies or pools of nothing crude. When we pass on, we're so full on deseo, on wanting. Some kind person crosses our arms for us to help carry the things we build onto. We want dreams to warm us in this deep sleep. Our bones are the last to melt away. A vela is made of all of us, bones, a slick dream in the shape of a cylinder, a spine that gets lit. We glare, become light, and sometimes when you look at a vela's tongue on fire, you become lost in the moment. You place everything into a flicker. Time is silent. That's what a wish is. A vela is a line lit on the nights when you are in La Union and she is in Houston. You are far from each other, and your dreams fit into a wick. It is a slow burn, and sometimes, even when the body breaks, the backbone doesn't. Light up again. When rooms are full of shadows, there's one candle standing until there are two. And in your house, there are finally four standing together, and that glow is up. We watch this in the slender wisp of smoke building in your home. We watch your fingers meet. You are candle skins that spade a yellow touch. You are a burn of molten heart and a single llama. A candelabra moves across every line in the sand, erasing every border of a room, every baseboard. Tonight, I light a vela for you, but you shine brighter. Together, you are always. Stay together. Thank you, guys.
Hey, thank you, man. Hey, one more thing real quick.
Yeah.
How do people find your book?
You can, I'll probably be reposting the link on Twitter and on Facebook, but you can go to willowbooks.net and order the book from there. It's actually, I think it's still on discount. And so you can buy the book there. And if you go to my website, thepoetmendez.org, it's like big old photo of the book, and you can click on the link and buy it from there.
And that's your Twitter handle too, right? Is
at the Poet Mendez.
At the Poet Mendez.
And so yeah, thank you guys for the opportunity. This was so much fun. And,
hey, thanks for stopping by. We're glad you said yes.
This is awesome. Yes. Yeah. If y'all ever need anything, let me know. Let's collaborate in some other way too.
Awesome.
Digital Projects has your back.
Udo 956. We're gonna do a 956 project.
956 for sure.
Love it.
Thank you so much, Lupe, for joining us here. I encourage you to go onto the Facebook and read the comments, because you got a lot of love, and there was also some questions from the audience that we weren't able to get to. So maybe you can.
I'll answer them.
Get on there. Thank you, everyone that joined us this week for this phenomenal conversation. This is brought to you by the Blah Poetry Spot and Write Art Out. Other events that you can catch that Write Art Out is putting on is on Sundays. We have a writers group that happens on Zoom. Mondays is our open mic. So if you want to come and participate and you want to share some work, please join us on Zoom. And we're trying to stream these now on Facebook. It works.
Hey, like us on Facebook so you can get all that info.
Like us on Facebook so you get the notifications. And next week, next Thursday, 7:30, we are bringing you Dallas poet and national touring artist and winner, Wayne Henry is going to be joining us.
No shit, Wayne Henry's coming? That's awesome.
Wayne Henry's coming next week.
What?
And then I think we got Felita Hicks maybe
we got Felita after that one too.
What?
We got Felita from San Marcos, Texas.
And then
oh my God.
Roscoe Burnhams from
Richmond.
I mean, we got a stacked month for y'all. So please join us.
Send me links.
Yes.
Send me links.
We will post them. We are here. Like the Blah Poetry Spot on Facebook. Obviously, if you're watching this, you probably already did. But anywho, so Lupe Mendez, Eddie Vega. My name is Chibi. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys. Amazing host.
Good night.
Stay safe. Good night.
Night.
Adios. Take us out.